I hated him. Those three words tell you everything you need to know about Stone Cold Steve Austin. He was not a man who played games. When Austin stepped into the ring, he was there to fight. When he looked at another wrestler, he saw them for what they really were. And sometimes, what he saw made his blood boil. Stone Cold Steve Austin was one of the biggest stars wrestling has ever seen. He was the guy who saved the WWF during the Monday Night Wars. He was the rebel who stood up to his boss and became a legend doing it. Austin wore black boots, talked trash, and stunned anyone who got in his way. Kids loved him, adults loved him, even people who hated wrestling knew who Stone Cold was. He became more than just a wrestler, he became a cultural icon. His face was on t-shirts everywhere. His catchphrases were repeated in schoolyards across America. Stone Cold was not just famous, he was unstoppable. But behind the scenes, Austin was not friends with everyone. In fact, there were some wrestlers he could not stand, some he refused to work with, some he thought were fake, some he believed were hurting the business he loved. These were not just little arguments. These were real problems that changed the course of wrestling history. One of these feuds was so bad that it never even made it to TV. Austin said no, and that was the end of it. Today, we are going to talk about 6 wrestlers Stone Cold Steve Austin hated. Some of these names will surprise you. Some of them you already know about, but all of them show you what kind of man Austin really was. He did not care about being polite. He cared about being the best. And if you got in the way of that, you were going to hear about it. Let's start with the guy Austin hated the most. Jeff Jarrett is the one wrestler Stone Cold Steve Austin flat out refused to work with. This was not a disagreement about money. This was not about a storyline. This was pure hatred. Austin thought Jarrett was not good enough to share a ring with him, and he made sure everyone knew it. The problems started back in Memphis. Before either man was a big star, Austin and Jarrett worked together in a small wrestling company. Even back then, Austin thought Jarrett was sloppy. There was one story that really stuck with Austin. Jarrett wore these long tights with tassels hanging off them. Every time Austin tried to do a head scissor move, the tassels would fall into his mouth. It sounds like a small thing, but to Austin, it was a sign. It showed that Jarrett did not care enough about his craft. He did not pay attention to the details. And in wrestling, details matter. When you are trying to make something look real, every little thing counts. Those tassels ruined the illusion for Austin. They reminded him that Jarrett was not serious about being the best. Years later, Jarrett returned to the WWF in 1997. By this time, Austin was becoming a huge star. The company wanted to book a feud between Austin and Jarrett. It would have been a big deal, but Austin said no. He refused to do it. He told the bosses that he would not wrestle Jarrett. He did not think Jarrett was worth his time. Austin had worked too hard to get to the top. He was not going to waste his momentum on someone he did not believe in. Things got even worse when Jarrett supposedly criticized Austin's famous catchphrase, Austin 3:16. Jarrett thought it was disrespectful to religion. He called it blasphemy. For Austin, that was the final straw. Austin's whole character was about being anti-authority and speaking his mind. If Jarrett could not understand that, then they had nothing to talk about. Austin had enough power to kill the feud before it started. The company listened to him. Jarrett never got his match with Stone Cold. Austin did not care if it hurt Jarrett's career. He was not going to damage his own reputation by working with someone he did not respect. To Austin, wrestling was about being real, and Jarrett was not real enough. Hulk Hogan is one of the most famous wrestlers of all time. He was the face of wrestling in the 1980s. He was a hero to millions of kids, but Stone Cold Steve Austin wanted nothing to do with him. In 2002, WE planned a huge match for WrestleMania 18. The plan was for Austin to face Hogan. It would have been a dream match. Two of the biggest stars in wrestling history going head-to-head. Fans would have loved it. The company would have made a ton of money. But Austin said no. Instead, The Rock fought Hogan, and it became one of the most famous matches ever. Austin gave up millions of dollars because he did not want to work with Hogan. Why did Austin refuse? He gave 2 reasons. First, he honestly believed the match would be bad. Austin said their styles did not fit together. Hogan's matches followed the same pattern every time. He would get beat up, then suddenly Hulk up, shake off the pain, and win. It was theatrical. It was over the top. Austin's style was the opposite. He brawled. He fought dirty. He made everything look real and gritty. Austin knew that if they tried to wrestle each other, it would look like a mess. He did not want to ruin his reputation with a bad match on the biggest stage of the year. But there was a deeper reason. Austin did not trust Hogan. Back in the 1990s, Austin worked for WCW, a rival wrestling company. Hogan was the top star there. Austin believed that Hogan used his backstage power to keep other wrestlers down. Austin felt felt like Hogan and his friends made sure he never got a real chance to shine. Austin was released from WWE and had to start over in the WWF. He never forgot that. That experience shaped everything Austin did after. He swore he would never let anyone have that kind of power over him again. Austin was afraid that if he agreed to wrestle Hogan, Hogan would try to change the finish of the match at the last second. He called it Hogan's voodoo politicking magic. Austin thought Hogan might convince Vince McMahon to let him win. Instead of following the plan, Austin was not going to take that risk. He had been burned before, and he was not going to let it happen again. The Rock ended up taking the match, and it worked out great. The Rock's style was more theatrical, just like Hogan's. They clicked in a way Austin and Hogan never could have. Austin was right to say no. He protected his legacy and avoided a disaster. But it showed that Austin would turn down a fortune if it meant keeping control of his career. Stone Cold Steve Austin's feud with Brock Lesnar never happened. But it is one of the most famous stories in wrestling history. In 2002, Austin walked out of the WWE. He went home in the middle of the biggest run of his career. It shocked everyone, and it all started because of Brock Lesnar. Lesnar was a new wrestler. He was young, strong, and talented. The company saw him as the future. We wanted to push Lesnar to the top as fast as possible, so they came up with a plan. They wanted Austin to lose to Lesnar on an episode of Monday Night Raw. It would be a huge moment. Lesnar would beat a Stone Cold, and it would make him a star overnight. But Austin said no. He refused to show up. He drove home to San Antonio without telling anyone. The company was furious. Vince McMahon went on TV and said Austin was no longer part of the roster. Jim Ross, the announcer, called Austin's decision personal and unprofessional. Fans were confused. Why would Austin refuse to help a young star? Years later, Austin explained himself. He said the problem was not about losing to Lesnar. Austin was willing to lose, but he believed the match needed to be built up first. You do not just throw together a match between Stone Cold and a rising star on free TV. That is a pay-per-view match. That is a match you promote for weeks. That is a match people should have to pay to see by giving it away on Raw without any build-up. We was wasting a huge opportunity. They were throwing away money. Austin saw it as disrespectful to everyone involved. It cheapened what both men had worked for. Austin believed that moments like this needed to be treated with respect. Wrestling is about building drama. You create tension. You make people want to see the match. Then when they finally get it, they are excited by rushing the match and putting it on TV with no warning. We was disrespecting both Austin and Lesnar. It would hurt Austin's legacy, and it would not help Lesnar as much as it could have. Vince McMahon later said that Austin was the toughest man to work with, but even Brock Lesnar admitted years later that Austin was right. Lesnar said he understood business. Austin was fighting for something bigger than himself. He was fighting to protect the way wrestling should be done, and he was willing to walk away from everything to prove his point. Stone Cold Steve Austin's feud with Vince McMahon is the most famous storyline in wrestling history. Every week, Austin would show up and make McMahon's life miserable. He would stun him, pour beer on him, and drive trucks into the arena. Fans loved every second of it. But what people did not always realize was that some of the hatred was real. Vince McMahon was Austin's boss. He was the owner of the WWE. He controlled everything, and Austin did not like being controlled. Austin wanted to have a say in his storylines. He wanted to protect his character. He wanted to make sure he was not being used in the wrong way. McMahon, on the other hand, wanted total control. He was used to wrestlers doing what they were told. But Austin was not like other wrestlers. The two men clashed all the time. Sometimes it was about creative decisions. Sometimes it was about money. Sometimes it was just about respect. McMahon later admitted that Austin was the toughest person he ever worked with, but he also knew that Austin was making him rich. The Austin Versus. McMahon's storyline was the reason WWE beat WCW in the ratings war. It was the reason WWE became the biggest wrestling company in the world. The storyline worked because the tension between them was real. When Austin stunned McMahon on TV, there was a part of him that really wanted to do it. When McMahon yelled at Austin, there was a part of him that was really frustrated. They turned their real-life battles into entertainment, and it made both of them legends. But it was not always easy. The 2002 walkout put a huge strain on their relationship. McMahon felt betrayed. He had given Austin everything, and Austin walked out on him. It took time for them to rebuild trust. Even years later, you could tell there was still tension between them, but that tension was also what made their partnership so special. They pushed each other, they challenged each other, and together they created something unforgettable. The Rock and Stone Cold Steve Austin were the two biggest stars of the Attitude Era. They main evented WrestleMania 3 times. They had some of the best matches in WWE history. Fans still debate who was better, but behind the scenes, things were not always smooth. Austin and The Rock respected each other. They knew they needed each other to be great, but they were also competitors. They both wanted to be number one. They both wanted wanted the spotlight, and sometimes their egos got in the way. One story sums it up perfectly. Years after both men had retired, WWE was planning a segment for WrestleMania 30. Hulk Hogan, The Rock, and Stone Cold were all going to appear together. Austin was told he would be the last one to walk out to the ring. That was important. Being last meant you were the biggest star. But when Austin showed up, he found out that The Rock had been told the same thing. Both men thought they would be last. It caused tension. Austin was not happy. He felt like he had been lied to. There were other issues too. The Rock became a huge movie star. He started traveling on private jets. He stopped hanging out with the other wrestlers. Some people in the locker room thought The Rock was acting like he was too good for them. Austin never said it directly, but you could tell he was not thrilled about it. Austin was a wrestler. The Rock was becoming something else, but despite the ego battles, Austin and The Rock delivered every time they stepped into the ring together. They understood that their rivalry was good for business. They knew that fans wanted to see them fight, so they put their personal feelings aside and gave the people what they wanted. Their matches were brutal, dramatic, and unforgettable. And even if they did not always get along, they made each other better. Stone Cold Steve Austin's feud with Bret Hart was different from the others. This was not about hatred. This was not about backstage politics. This was about two of the best wrestlers in the world pushing each other to be even better. Their feud started in 1996 and reached its peak at WrestleMania 13 in 1997. That match changed Austin's career. It was a submission match, and it ended with Austin passing out in Bret Hart's finishing move, the sharpshooter. Austin refused to give up. Blood poured down his face. He fought until he could not fight anymore. It was one of the most iconic images in wrestling history, and it made Austin a superstar. Austin has always given Bret Hart credit for that. He said that Bret put me on the map big time. Bret was a veteran. He had been a champion for years. He could have made Austin look bad. Instead, he made Austin look like a warrior. Bret's decision to have Austin pass out instead of tapping out was a genius move. It protected Austin's character while still giving Bret the win. It was the kind of thing only a true professional would do. There were times when Austin and Bret did not see eye to eye. They had different opinions about how wrestling should be done. Bret was a technical wrestler who believed in perfect execution. Austin was a brawler who believed in emotion and intensity, but they both cared deeply about the business. They both wanted to tell the best stories possible, and that mutual respect made their feud so powerful. When they fought, you believed it was real. You felt every punch, every submission hold, every drop of sweat. It was wrestling at its finest. Bret Hart represents the kind of opponent Austin wanted. Someone who took the craft seriously, someone who was willing to sacrifice for the greater good, someone who understood that wrestling was not just about winning or losing. It was about creating moments that fans would never forget. Austin and Bret did that, and their feud will be remembered forever. Stone Cold Steve Austin made enemies. There is no doubt about that, but he made them for a reason. He refused to work with people he did not respect. He walked out when he thought the company was making a mistake. He fought his boss for creative control. He turned down millions of dollars to protect his legacy. Some people thought Austin was difficult. Some people thought he was selfish. But Austin saw it differently. He believed that if he did not stand up for himself, no one else would. He believed that wrestling deserved to be treated with respect, and he believed that the fans deserved the best possible product. Every time Austin made a stand, he was thinking about the bigger picture. He was thinking about what wrestling should be. Austin's walkout in 2002 set a precedent. It showed that top stars could say no. It showed that wrestlers did not have to accept every decision the company made. It changed the balance of power in wrestling. And even though it cost Austin in the short term, it helped him in the long run. When he came back, he was still one of the biggest stars in the world, and he had proven that he was willing to sacrifice everything to protect what he believed in. So which feud was the most brutal? Was it Jeff Jarrett, the man Austin refused to even look at? Was it Hulk Hogan, the dream match that never happened? Was it Brock Lesnar, the walkout that shocked the world? Or was it Vince McMahon, the boss Austin fought every single day? The truth is, they were all brutal in their own way. Each one showed a different side of Stone Cold Steve Austin. Each one revealed what he valued and what he was willing to fight for, and each one helped make him the legend he is today. Austin may have hated a few people along the way, but fans loved him for it, because when Stone Cold stepped into that ring, you knew he was giving you everything he had. He never took shortcuts. He never settled for less than the best. And that is why, even today, when you hear that glass shatter and the crowd erupts, you know you are watching something special. Which feud do you think was the most brutal? Drop your thoughts in the comments. When Shawn Michaels said he had enemies, he wasn't working an angle. The Heartbreak Kid had real hatred behind the curtain. 10 men who saw the darker side of his legendary career. These weren't storyline rivalries. These were personal wars that left scars, ended pushes, and nearly destroyed the WWF itself. But how did one of wrestling's greatest performers also become one of its most hated figures? The answer lies in power, politics, and the most dangerous faction in wrestling history. During the mid-1990s, Shawn Michaels wasn't just a champion. He was untouchable. He controlled booking decisions, manipulated management, and destroyed careers without consequence. The reason? A backstage group called The Clique. Michaels, Triple H, Kevin Nash, Scott Hall, and Sean Waltman formed an alliance that wielded unchecked power inside the WWF. They used their leverage to push their own careers forward while actively sabotaging anyone outside their circle. Michaels sat at the center of this machine. He had Vince McMahon's ear, complete creative control, and zero accountability. His talent was undeniable. Even his enemies admitted he was the best worker in the business. But that talent became a shield. It protected him from the consequences of his toxicity. While other wrestlers faced punishment for bad behavior, Michaels got rewarded. The company needed him too much to discipline him. This created a locker room atmosphere of fear and resentment. Wrestlers watched helplessly as Michaels and the Clique decided who got pushed and who got buried. If you weren't in their group, you were a target. And Michaels was the most dangerous member of all. Brilliant in the ring, ruthless behind the curtain, and completely willing to destroy anyone who stood in his way. The Undertaker once said that if Shawn Michaels was on fire, he wouldn't help put it out. That's how much his own colleagues despised him. But even Undertaker admitted there was nobody he'd rather work with in the ring. That's the paradox of Shawn Michaels. Professionally invaluable, personally intolerable. The following 10 feuds represent the full scope of Michaels' backstage destruction. Some involve creative sabotage, others crossed into personal cruelty. A few nearly ended in real violence. Together, they paint a picture of a man who let power corrupt him completely. Let's count down the 10 wrestlers who truly hated Shawn Michaels and had every reason to. Number 10, the Road Warriors. The Road Warriors represented old-school wrestling values. Animal and Hawk were respected veterans who'd earned their place through years of hard work. They didn't play politics. They didn't manipulate management. They just showed up and performed. So when they watched Shawn Michaels and the Clique take over the WWF, they saw something that disgusted them: corruption at the highest level. The Road Warriors didn't hide their contempt. They openly criticized Michaels' political leverage with Vince McMahon. In one infamous quote, they said Michaels had Vince in the palm of his hands and in his backside. That kind of public criticism from established locker room leaders was significant. It validated what everyone already knew. Michaels possessed undue influence over the company's owner. This wasn't just about one faction disliking another. The Road Warriors represented a generational conflict. They came from an era where respect was earned, not demanded, where politics stayed out of the ring, where talent alone determined your position. Michaels represented everything opposite: manipulation, backstage deals, and power plays that had nothing to do with ability. When legends start calling you corrupt, you know the hatred runs deep. Michaels didn't just make enemies. He made the entire locker room question whether merit mattered anymore. Number 9, Psycho Sid. Psycho Sid represented everything the Clique feared: a powerful main eventer who didn't need their approval. Sid Eudy was massive, charismatic, and capable of carrying the championship. But he had one fatal flaw in Michaels' eyes. He wasn't part of their group. That made him a threat. That made him a target. During Michaels' championship reign in the mid-1990s, Sid competed for the top spot. He had the size Vince McMahon traditionally loved. He had the presence to headline WrestleMania. But he also had to navigate the most toxic period of Michaels' career: the Syracuse bar fight, the backstage chaos, the Clique's controlling influence over every booking decision. Every time Sid tried to establish himself as the company's top star, he ran into an invisible wall built by Michaels and his allies. This was a political turf war. Michaels saw Sid as competition for the spot he'd claimed as his own. The Clique saw Sid as an outsider who needed to be controlled, so they worked to undermine his push whenever possible. The friction between Michaels and Sid shows how paranoid the Clique really was. They didn't just fight obvious enemies. They fought anyone with main event potential who wasn't them. Sid's crime wasn't doing anything wrong. It was being good enough to threaten their grip on power. Number 8, Chris Candido. Most of Shawn Michaels' backstage heat involved politics or egos. The conflict with Chris Candido went somewhere darker, into personal betrayal and moral toxicity. Candido wasn't a main eventer. He wasn't competing with Michaels for championships or spotlight, but Michaels destroyed him anyway through the cruelest method possible. Michaels allegedly engaged in a relationship with Candido's girlfriend at the time, Tammy Sitch, known on screen as Sunny. This wasn't about wrestling. This wasn't about creative control. This was a direct invasion of a colleague's personal life. In any workplace, workplace, interfering with a co-worker's relationship would be unacceptable. In the tight-knit world of professional wrestling, it was considered the ultimate locker room sin. The animosity this created was intense. Candido had to watch his personal life implode while working alongside the man responsible. He had to see Michaels walk around backstage with the political protection that made confronting him impossible. He had no recourse, no way to fight back. Michaels had Vince McMahon's backing. Candido had nothing but humiliation. This incident reveals the extent of Michaels' arrogance during his peak power. He didn't just think he was untouchable professionally, he believed he could do anything without consequence. Interfering with Candido's relationship wasn't even about wanting Tammy Sytch specifically. It was about proving he could. It was about demonstrating that his power extended everywhere, even into the most personal aspects of his colleagues' lives. When wrestlers talk about why they hated Shawn Michaels, the Candido situation always comes up. It represents the moment when Michaels stopped being just a difficult coworker and became genuinely cruel. He crossed a line most people recognize as sacred, and he did it because nobody could stop him. Number 7. Hulk Hogan. By 2005, Shawn Michaels was supposedly a changed man. He'd found faith. He'd apologized for his past behavior. He'd rebuilt his reputation as a respected performer and locker room leader. Then he stepped in the ring with Hulk Hogan at SummerSlam and proved that some things never change. Hogan was booked to win the match cleanly. Standard veteran respect booking, the older legend goes over, the younger star sells big to make him look good. But Michaels didn't see it that way. He believed an old, past his prime Hogan shouldn't decisively dominate him. He thought the booking was ridiculous, so he decided to protest. Michaels chose the most public way possible to show his displeasure. He intentionally oversold nearly every move Hogan executed. Not realistic selling, theatrical, comedic, almost mocking movement. Every punch sent him flying. Every move looked absurd. It was a deliberate display designed to expose how ridiculous he thought the match was. This incident is telling for several reasons. First, it happened years after Michaels celebrated redemption. The volatile substance-abusing 1990s Michaels was supposedly gone. But here he was, still unable to handle a booking decision he disagreed with, still willing to sabotage a match publicly, still convinced his opinion mattered more than the plan. Second, it revealed that Michaels' difficulty wasn't just about his wild 1990s persona. It was about a consistent competitive streak that bordered on arrogance. Even the reformed, faith-driven Michaels couldn't resist exposing what he saw as flawed booking. The ribbing might have been playful in his mind, but it showed the same underlying issue. Michaels believed he knew better than everyone else. The Hogan match proved that while Michaels had found personal peace, his professional competitiveness and willingness to test boundaries never fully disappeared. You can change your lifestyle. You can find faith. You can apologize for the past. But some core personality traits remain. And for Shawn Michaels, the need to be right, to be the best, to prove his point, that never went away. Number 6. Owen Hart. Not every feud involved screaming matches or physical fights. Some were quieter, more insidious. The heat between Shawn Michaels and Owen Hart represented the most damaging kind of backstage politics: systematic career obstruction. Owen never had a public blow-up with Michaels. He didn't get into a brawl. He just watched his opportunities disappear. Owen Hart was one of the most talented performers in the WWF during the mid-1990s. He could work any style. He could make anyone look good. He had the Hart family name and credibility. By all logic, he should have been pushed to main event status. But he never got there. And the Kliq's political maneuvering was a big reason why. Reports suggest Michaels and his allies used their creative control influence to railroad Owen's advancement. That term, railroad, means systematically blocking someone's career progression, not through one big incident, but through constant small acts of sabotage. A bad word to Vince McMahon here. A booking suggestion there. Quiet poison dripped slowly until it killed Owen's momentum completely. Why target Owen? Because he was Bret Hart's brother. In the Kliq's factional war against the Hart family, Owen was collateral damage. He didn't have to do anything wrong. His last name made him an enemy. So Michaels and his group ensured Owen hit a glass ceiling he couldn't break through, no matter how good he was. This kind of political obstruction is worse than a public feud in some ways. At least with someone like Bret Hart, the conflict was visible. Everyone knew they hated each other. Owen's situation was different. He struggled and failed without understanding why. He couldn't point to a specific incident. He couldn't defend himself. He just slowly realized the main event would never happen for him. Owen Hart's career illustrates how the Kliq didn't just hurt their direct enemies. They damaged anyone connected to those enemies. They created an organizational barrier that talented talent alone couldn't overcome. Michaels enabled this system. He benefited from it. And Owen paid the price. A career that should have reached the top permanently stuck one level below. Not because he lacked ability, but because he had the wrong friends and family. Number 5. Marty Jannetty. Before the clique, before the championship runs, before the political manipulation, there was Marty Jannetty. Jannetty represented Shawn Michaels' first major betrayal. The moment when personal ambition trumped loyalty completely. The Rockers were a successful tag team. They could have continued for years, but Michaels wanted more. He wanted singles stardom, and he was willing to destroy his partner to get it. The famous barbershop segment showed Michaels attacking Jannetty, throwing him through a window. It was a shocking moment on television. A tag team violently splitting up, but backstage it represented something deeper. Michaels aggressively transitioning to singles competition while leaving Jannetty behind. Real friction existed between them, rooted in Michaels' overwhelming professional ambition. After the split, Michaels became a superstar. Jannetty struggled. Reunion angles were attempted but failed to gain traction. When asked about this later, Michaels justified his actions by pointing to Jannetty's career inconsistencies. He said Jannetty would shoot himself in the foot by failing to stay with the company. Essentially, Michaels blamed Jannetty for the very problems the split created. This pattern became typical for Michaels. Betray someone, then justify it afterward by claiming they weren't good enough anyway. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy. Break someone's momentum, watch them struggle, then use their struggle as proof you were right to break them in the first place. The Jannetty split was the first sign of what Michaels would become. It showed his willingness to prioritize his singular trajectory above all else. It demonstrated that loyalty meant nothing compared to ambition. It proved that anyone standing between Michaels and success would be removed, regardless of history or friendship. Years later, people remember Shawn Michaels as a main eventer and Marty Jannetty as a cautionary tale. But that outcome wasn't inevitable. It was manufactured by Michaels' calculated betrayal. He didn't just leave a tag team, he ended his partner's career to boost his own. That's where the pattern started. That's when Michaels first chose himself over everyone else. Number 4. The Undertaker. The relationship between Shawn Michaels and The Undertaker during the 1990s represented a unique dynamic. Personal disgust mixed with professional respect. Mark Calloway was the quiet, authoritative presence in the locker room. Cool, collected, and commanding respect through presence rather than politics. He watched Michaels' behavior with growing distaste. Undertaker openly stated that during Michaels' early years, he didn't care for him as a human being. He went further, saying if Shawn was on fire, he wouldn't help put it out. That's an extraordinary level of personal dislike. Undertaker wasn't a gossip. He wasn't dramatic. When he expressed that kind of contempt, it meant something. Michaels himself acknowledged the source of friction. He characterized his personality at the time as very outgoing, which he admitted really meant overly obnoxious. That's a polite way of saying he was insufferable, loud, arrogant, constantly demanding attention and special treatment. Everything that would annoy a quiet professional like Undertaker. But here's the paradox. Despite despising Michaels personally, Undertaker recognized his superior in-ring talent. He admitted there was nobody he'd rather work with professionally. This created an impossible situation. Undertaker wanted nothing to do with Michaels as a person, but needed him as a performer. That tension defined their relationship throughout the decade. The conflict reached its breaking point before WrestleMania 14 in 1998. Michaels was scheduled to drop the WWF Championship to Steve Austin, signaling the transition to the Attitude Era. But Michaels, dealing with a severe back injury and displaying erratic behavior, was reportedly reluctant to perform the clean title change as booked. This wasn't just about one match. It was about the company's biggest event and most important storyline. Michaels' reluctance threatened everything. The severity of the situation required intervention from the locker room's ultimate authority, The Undertaker himself. Undertaker allegedly delivered an ultimatum to Michaels backstage. The message was clear: do the job as planned or face consequences. This wasn't a request. It was an order from the one man in the company with enough moral authority and physical credibility to enforce it. Michaels complied. The match happened as booked. Austin won the title. This intervention speaks volumes about how bad things had gotten. Michaels' behavior had spiraled to the point where not even his political protection mattered. The Undertaker's ultimatum showed that eventually someone has to step in. Even the most powerful wrestler in the company had limits. Even Shawn Michaels had to answer to someone. The Undertaker-Michaels dynamic reveals why so many people hated Shawn. It wasn't jealousy, it wasn't politics, it was genuine disgust at watching someone abuse power without accountability, until finally someone powerful enough forced him to stop. Number 3, the British Bulldog. The British Bulldog, Davey Boy Smith, was caught in the crossfire of Michaels' war against the Hart family. But this wasn't just political maneuvering or booking disputes. What happened between Michaels and the British Bulldog crossed into personal cruelty, deliberately humiliating humiliating a man in front of his home country and attacking his family for no reason except pure spite. The conflict peaked at one night-only pay-per-view in Birmingham, England in September 1997. The British Bulldog defended the WWF European Championship in the main event. He was performing in his home country, receiving overwhelming support from the crowd. Michaels, the challenger, was heavily booed and garnered massive heel heat. Michaels defeated the British Bulldog to win the championship. That alone would have been controversial, taking the title from a beloved local hero in his homeland. But Michaels didn't stop there. After the victory, he actively taunted the British crowd. He mocked their support. He turned what should have been a professional match into a deliberate insult. Then it got worse. Michaels directed clear insults toward Davey Boy Smith's wife, Diana Hart Smith, who was sitting at ringside. Diana was Bret Hart's sister. She had nothing to do with the match. She wasn't part of the storyline. Michaels targeted her anyway, taunting her publicly while she watched helplessly. This act confirmed that Michaels viewed the British Bulldog conflict as an extension of his war with Bret Hart. It wasn't about the European Championship. It wasn't even about Davey Boy Smith specifically. It was about attacking anyone connected to the Hart family. Michaels used emotional provocation as a weapon, blurring the line between kayfabe and reality to cause maximum damage. The British Bulldog incident shows Michaels at his most unnecessarily cruel. He didn't need to taunt Diana. He didn't need to insult the British crowd beyond normal heel work. He chose to escalate. He chose to make it personal. He chose to hurt people who couldn't fight back. That's not being a great heel. That's being genuinely mean. Years later, people remember that night in Birmingham as one of the clearest examples of Michaels' toxicity. He had the European Championship. He had the victory. But that wasn't enough. He needed to humiliate people. He needed to prove his power extended everywhere, even across the Atlantic, even into the personal lives of families who never asked to be part of his war. Number 2, Vader. Vader represents one of the clearest cases of Shawn Michaels using political power to sabotage someone's career. Leon White was a legitimate international star, imposing, athletic despite his size, and credible as a monster heel. When he arrived in the WWF, he was slated for a significant championship run. The plan was clear. Vader would defeat Shawn Michaels for the WWF Championship at SummerSlam 1996. That title change never happened. Reports indicate Michaels used his considerable influence to veto the planned finish. He effectively killed the original booking. The resulting match at SummerSlam was a disaster. Chaotic structure, multiple awkward restarts following a countout and disqualification. Clear signs of backstage political disputes manifesting physically in the ring. Michaels' frustration was visible throughout the match. He worked stiff. He seemed irritated. The chemistry was terrible. The match concluded with Michaels retaining the title via a moonsault press. Vader, the monster who was supposed to be unstoppable, was stopped completely. The damage to Vader's credibility was severe and permanent. He arrived in the WWF as a dangerous threat. He left SummerSlam looking weak. His failure to defeat Michaels, and the manner of that failure, destroyed his momentum. He never recovered. The push that was supposed to make him the company's top heel instead became a cautionary tale about what happens when you go against Michaels. Even Jim Ross, a company insider, criticized Michaels' handling of the situation. Ross said Michaels overplayed his hand, calling his behavior very unprofessional. Then Ross added something chilling. Michaels was just lucky Vader didn't beat him up for real, because Leon White absolutely could have. That comment reveals how precarious Michaels' position really was. His political power protected him from booking consequences, but it couldn't protect him from physical retaliation if Vader decided to shoot on him. The fact that industry veterans like Jim Ross openly criticized Michaels shows how indefensible his actions were. The Vader incident is historically used to demonstrate how Michaels prioritized his control over the company's long-term needs. Vader could have been a major star. The WWF needed credible monster heels, but Michaels wouldn't allow anyone to look stronger than him, even temporarily. His ego superseded business logic. Vader's failed push shows the clique's power at its most damaging. They didn't just protect their own positions. They actively diminished non-affiliated rivals. Michaels could have had a great match, lost the title, and won it back later. Instead, he refused to do business. He killed Vader's career to maintain his grip on the championship. That's not protecting your spot. That's abusing power. Number 1, Bret Hart. The conflict between Shawn Michaels and Bret Hart represents professional wrestling's most famous and consequential backstage feud. This wasn't just heat. This was pure, unresolved hatred that escalated from professional rivalry into personal war. It nearly destroyed both men. It definitely scarred the WWF forever. Initially, the animosity was partly manufactured. The company wanted to intensify their on-screen rivalry leading up to their Iron Man match at WrestleMania 12 in 1996. The plan was to work the boys, make everyone think the heat was real to add legitimacy to the storyline. But the attempt to fake hatred soon transitioned transitioned into genuine, escalating animosity as both competitors struggled for supremacy within the WWF hierarchy. The problem was simple. Two of the best performers in the world, both believing they deserved to be on top, both unwilling to accept second place. Bret Hart represented traditional wrestling values. He was technical, professional, and believed in doing business the right way. Michaels represented the clique's political approach, manipulation, backstage deals, and leveraging power to maintain position. The rivalry crossed an irreversible line into unforgivable territory in 1997. Michaels used a live Raw segment to deliver the infamous Sunny Days promo. He referenced a rumored affair involving Bret Hart, a blatant and public disrespect to Hart's family and character. This wasn't working. This was a personal attack designed to humiliate Hart in front of millions of viewers. Bret didn't respond with words. He responded with violence. Backstage in Hartford, Connecticut, in June 1997, Hart and Michaels had a physical altercation. The brawl was intense enough that Hart reportedly pulled hair out of Michaels' head. The atmosphere was so toxic that Michaels subsequently requested his release from the WWF. He wanted to join Kevin Nash and Scott Hall in WCW's NWO. Vince McMahon denied the request, but the fact that Michaels wanted out shows how bad things had gotten. The Hartford fight should have been the end. It wasn't. The antagonism kept building toward its catastrophic peak, the Montreal Screwjob at Survivor Series in November 1997. Bret Hart was leaving for WCW. He was the WWF champion. The question was how to transition the title. Hart refused to lose in Canada, his home country. The solution seemed simple: have him lose somewhere else. But Vince McMahon and Shawn Michaels had other plans. During the main event match in Montreal, Bret Hart was locked in his own sharpshooter submission hold by Michaels. Hart never submitted, but referee Earl Hebner called for the bell anyway, ending the match and awarding Michaels the championship. McMahon ordered it. Hebner executed it. Michaels was complicit in it. The Montreal Screwjob was professional betrayal at the highest level. Hart was leaving anyway. They could have handled it professionally. Instead, they chose humiliation. They chose to steal the championship from him on live television in his home country in front of his family. Michaels capitalized on the real-life controversy afterward. He integrated public knowledge of the double cross into his on-screen persona. He blurred work and shoot so completely that the industry couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. This solidified his status as the most despised figure in wrestling. The hatred between Hart and Michaels lasted for years, 13 years. Bret refused to speak to Shawn. Shawn claimed he had to do what was best for business. Neither man would back down. The wound stayed open, painful, and unresolved. Then, in January 2010, something remarkable happened. Bret Hart returned to WWE programming for the first time since 1997. On Monday Night Raw, he shared an emotional televised segment with Shawn Michaels. They made peace. Bret later wrote that the reconciliation felt like closing a chapter that had been left painfully open for far too long. Michaels affirmed the authenticity of the moment, stating it was about two men who had carried around too much anger finally finding peace. The reconciliation was real, but it doesn't erase what happened. It doesn't undo the Montreal Screwjob. It doesn't change the years of genuine hatred. It doesn't excuse Michaels' role in the most controversial moment in wrestling history. Peace came eventually, but only after more than a decade of destruction. The Bret Hart feud sits at number one because it encompasses everything wrong with Shawn Michaels during his first run. The political manipulation, the personal cruelty, the willingness to cross any line to stay on top, the abuse of power that came from knowing he was too valuable to punish. All of it culminated in Montreal, a moment that damaged the industry's credibility and proved that Michaels would sacrifice anything, including professional integrity, to maintain his position. Bret Hart didn't just hate Shawn Michaels. He despised what Shawn represented: the selfishness, the politics, the manipulation. And he wasn't the only one. But his hatred cut the deepest because it was justified by the biggest betrayal wrestling had ever seen. The widespread animosity and chaotic backstage environment Shawn Michaels created eventually reached a breaking point. His body gave out first. The severe back injury he suffered forced him into retirement in 1998. But the physical collapse was just a symptom. The real problem was emotional and spiritual breakdown. There was also the Syracuse bar fight, where Michaels got beaten severely by multiple attackers. His erratic behavior had made enemies everywhere, inside and outside the business. The violence, the injury, the constant drama, it all became unsustainable. Michaels was forced to step away. During his time away from wrestling, something changed. Michaels later confessed that despite achieving his dream of being on top of the wrestling world, he felt isolated and miserable. His own words, "This sucks." He acknowledged that maintaining the abrasive persona required to survive the political trenches came at an intolerable personal cost. Being a rock, being untouchable, being hated, it destroyed him. Michaels found faith. He embraced embraced Christianity. When he returned to wrestling years later, he was different. The redemption was genuine. He focused on creating special moments instead of generating conflict. He mentored younger talent. He avoided the political games. He became the respected elder statesman instead of the locker room cancer. But redemption doesn't erase history. Michaels found peace with himself and with Bret Hart. He apologized. He changed. He became someone his former self wouldn't recognize. That's admirable, but it doesn't undo the careers he damaged. It doesn't fix the toxicity he created. It doesn't excuse the years of destruction. Shawn Michaels' story isn't just about greatness. It's about how power without humility can make even the best performer hated by everyone around him. From Bret Hart to the Road Warriors, from Vader to Chris Candido, each feud left a scar. And every scar told the same story. The Heartbreak Kid broke more than just hearts. He broke trust, careers, and the locker room itself. The 10 wrestlers who hated Shawn Michaels had legitimate reasons. The animosity wasn't manufactured. The heat was real. And while Michaels eventually found redemption, the wreckage he left behind during his first run remains part of his legacy. You can't separate the artist from the damage he caused. You can only acknowledge both and understand that one of wrestling's greatest performers was also one of its most destructive personalities. If you enjoyed uncovering the darker side of wrestling history, hit like, subscribe, and tell us, which Shawn Michaels feud shocked you the most? He had no strength. Those were Randy Savage's exact words about one of the men he hated most. And he wasn't joking. Savage wasn't just intense on screen. His real-life hatred for certain wrestlers was brutal, personal, and decades long. This is the story of 3 men who crossed the Macho Man and paid the price. Randy Macho Man Savage was a legend. He was one of the greatest wrestlers to ever step into a ring. His match against Ricky the Dragon Steamboat at WrestleMania 3 is still called one of the best matches ever. They planned every move. Every second was perfect. That's how serious Savage was about his work. He was disciplined. He was focused. He gave everything to wrestling. But behind the brilliance, there was something darker. Savage was paranoid. He was protective, and he never forgot anything. If you crossed him, he would remember it forever. His darkest rivalries weren't made up for the cameras. They were painfully real, and they lasted for years. 3 men learned this the hard way. Let's talk about them. Savage and Hulk Hogan started as allies. They called themselves the Mega Powers. They were the 2 biggest stars in wrestling. They teamed up. They won matches. Fans loved them. But there was a problem. Savage's wife, Miss Elizabeth, was part of the act. She stood at ringside. She cheered them on, and that made Savage nervous. Savage married Elizabeth in 1984, years before anyone knew they were together. She was shy. She was quiet. And Savage was obsessed with protecting her. The wrestling world back then was wild. Wrestlers partied. They chased women. And Savage didn't trust any of them around Elizabeth. He set strict boundaries. No one was allowed to get too friendly with her, not even Hogan. The trouble started before WrestleMania 5 in 1989. During a match, Elizabeth got hurt. Hogan rushed over to check on her. He wanted to help, but Savage saw it differently. He thought Hogan was stepping on his toes. He was the champion. She was his wife. Hogan had no right. On screen, this became the storyline. Savage turned on Hogan. He attacked him with the championship belt. He accused Hogan of trying to steal Elizabeth. But here's the thing. Part of that anger was real. Behind the scenes, Savage was tired of living in Hogan's shadow. Hogan was the face of wrestling. Even when Savage held the title, Hogan got more attention. Savage felt disrespected. He felt like Hogan was always the #1 guy, and now Hogan was getting too close to Elizabeth. That pushed Savage over the edge. Then came the real betrayal. In the early 1990s, Hogan invited Elizabeth to Miami. He said it was innocent. He wanted her to spend time with his wife, Linda, and his kids. Just a friendly trip. But Elizabeth started acting differently. Hotel staff joked that they didn't know where to deliver her room service because she kept changing rooms. She was gaining independence. She was pulling away from Savage. And Savage blamed Hogan for all of it. In 1992, Savage and Elizabeth divorced. For Savage, this wasn't just the end of a marriage. It was the destruction of everything he had built. He had controlled every part of their life together. He had protected her from everyone. And now she was gone. And in his mind, it was Hogan's fault. Hogan admitted later that Savage blamed everything on him. Hogan said he didn't know Elizabeth was going to run wild on Savage. But by then, the damage was done. Savage and Hogan never made up. Not really. Even after years passed, the hatred stayed. In 2003, Savage released a rap album. The title track was called Be a Man. It was a diss track aimed straight at Hogan. Savage didn't hold back. He attacked Hogan's character. He attacked his reputation. He made sure everyone knew how much he hated him. This wasn't a wrestling angle. This was real. Even a decade after they stopped working together, Savage couldn't let it go. The wound never healed. Hogan broke Savage's trust. He broke his marriage. And Savage never forgave him. If Hogan broke Savage's heart, Vince McMahon tried to erase replace his legacy. The feud between Savage and McMahon was different. It wasn't about emotions. It was about business, about control, about money. And it ended with Savage being blacklisted from WWE for 17 years. In 1994, Savage reached a crossroads. He was still wrestling. He still had energy. He still wanted to compete. But McMahon had other plans. McMahon wanted Savage to retire from wrestling and become a full-time commentator. Savage refused. He didn't want to sit at a desk and talk. He wanted to perform. His last major match was against Crush at WrestleMania X in March 1994. By September, he wrestled his final WWE match in Germany. When his contract ended in October, he left the company. At first, McMahon seemed sad to see him go. He gave Savage a heartfelt goodbye on Monday Night Raw. That was unusual. Most wrestlers who left for rival companies didn't get that treatment. It showed that McMahon had real affection for Savage. But that affection wouldn't last. Savage signed with World Championship Wrestling. That alone was bad enough. WCW was WWE's biggest rival. But Savage did something worse. He took the Slim Jim endorsement deal with him. Slim Jim was a multi-million-dollar sponsor, and WWE desperately needed that money. The company was losing tens of millions of dollars every year. Losing Slim Jim was a huge financial blow. McMahon tried to replace Savage in the commercials, but Slim Jim refused. They wanted Savage, only Savage. So the deal went with him to WCW. McMahon never forgave him. Over the years, McMahon welcomed back other wrestlers who had betrayed him. Hulk Hogan returned. Scott Hall returned. Kevin Nash returned. Steve Austin returned. Even Brock Lesnar returned. All of them had caused McMahon problems, but they all got second chances. Savage didn't. From 1994 until his death in 2011, Savage was completely shut out. He was erased from WWE history. His name wasn't mentioned. His matches weren't shown. It was like he never existed. Why? The official reason was the Slim Jim deal, but many people in wrestling believed there was something more. A rumor spread through the locker rooms. The rumor was that Savage had an inappropriate relationship with Stephanie McMahon, Vince's daughter. Stephanie was born in 1976. She turned 18 in September 1994. Savage left WWE in November 1994. The timeline made the rumor plausible, but no one ever confirmed it. No proof ever surfaced. It remained just a rumor. But true or not, that rumor gave McMahon a reason to keep Savage banned. It wasn't just business anymore. It was personal. It was about family. McMahon is known for holding grudges, and this one lasted until Savage died. Even then, it took years before WWE fully honored Savage's legacy. The feud between Savage and McMahon was a dual betrayal. First, Savage took the money during a crisis. Second, the family rumor gave McMahon the personal justification he needed to keep Savage out forever. That's why this feud ranks as one of the deepest. It cost Savage his place in wrestling history for nearly 2 decades. The feud between Savage and Road Warrior Hawk was different from the others. It wasn't about love. It wasn't about business. It was about respect, and it ended in violence. The trouble started at a dinner in Tampa. Savage allegedly made a comment to Hawk's wife, Dale. He supposedly said, "Hey, how'd you like for me to take you under the table and show you what a real man's like?" Dale didn't tell Hawk right away. She kept it secret for about 2 years, but eventually Hawk found out. And when he did, he was furious. He reportedly said, "I'll kill that man next time I see him." That next time came in July 1996. It was at a joint WCW and New Japan show in Sapporo, Japan. Savage was about to walk through the curtain for his match. His entrance music was playing, and that's when Hawk attacked him. Hawk confronted Savage right there backstage. Savage's manager, Sonny Onu, had to step between them. They were face to face, ready to fight. The stories about what happened next are conflicting. Hawk claimed he knocked Savage down with one slap. He said Savage got destroyed. But Savage's brother, Lanny Poffo, told a different story. He said Savage took the punch and kept walking because he had a job to do. After his match, Savage tried to go after Hawk, but other wrestlers broke it up. Either way, both men walked away angry, and Savage never forgot. 3 years later, Savage got his revenge. On November 6, 1999, Savage and Hawk ran into each other at a Kid Rock concert in Tampa. The Sundome Arena was packed. According to reports, Hawk extended his hand. Maybe he wanted to make peace. Maybe he was just being polite, but Savage didn't care. He batted Hawk's hand away and punched him hard. Hawk went down. Some say he was knocked out, but the fight didn't stop there. Savage's girlfriend at the time, Gorgeous George, got involved. So did another woman. They attacked Hawk's wife, Dale. Reports say they left Dale badly injured. They cut her open. They tore out chunks of her hair. It was brutal. It was public, and it crossed a line. Gorgeous George later confirmed that she and Savage fought Hawk that night. She didn't deny it. The consequences were immediate. Hawk considered filing a lawsuit. Lanny Poffo confirmed that the fight led to litigation. He also said that Dale suffered permanent damage from the attack. This wasn't just a backstage scuffle between wrestlers. This was a full-scale brawl involving wives wives and girlfriends. It was violent, it was messy, and it showed just how far Savage was willing to go when he felt disrespected. The feud with Hawk stands out because it was the only one that resulted in documented physical violence and legal action. Savage didn't just hate Hawk, he made sure Hawk paid the price. So what connects all three feuds? Control. Savage hated losing control. With Hogan, he lost control of his wife and his career. Hogan overshadowed him. Hogan helped Elizabeth gain independence, and Savage couldn't handle it. With McMahon, he lost control of his in-ring career. McMahon tried to push him into commentary, so Savage took the Slim Jim deal and left. He refused to let McMahon dictate his future. With Hawk, he lost control of respect. Hawk disrespected him, Hawk disrespected Dale, and Savage retaliated with violence. Each feud wasn't just personal, it was nuclear. Savage didn't do anything halfway. When he loved hard. When he hated forever. His feuds with Hogan, McMahon, and Hawk weren't storylines. They were real. They had real consequences. Hogan lost a friend, McMahon lost a star and a sponsor. Hawk and his wife got hurt, and Savage paid the price too. He spent his final years shut out from WWE. He spent years angry at Hogan. He spent years fighting battles that never really ended. Randy Savage was one of the greatest wrestlers of all time. His legacy is legendary, but his real-life feuds show the darker side of that intensity. He lived and fought like every moment was real, because for him it was. Even in death, these rivalries remain part of his story. They remind us that the Macho Man wasn't just a character. He was a man who loved hard, protected fiercely, and never ever forgave. If you want more stories from the wildest corners of wrestling, hit that like and subscribe. Paul Orndorff didn't hold back. He said it himself. There were wrestlers he flat out hated. He was weak. That's what Orndorff thought about some of the biggest names in wrestling. These weren't just guys he disagreed with. These were men who made his blood boil. Men who represented everything he despised about the business. Orndorff had a short temper. He had a sharp tongue. And above all else, he was obsessed with toughness. If you couldn't hack it, if you took shortcuts, if you got by on politics instead of sweat, Mr. Wonderful had no respect for you, and he didn't hide it. In his brutal 2002 shoot interview, Orndorff named names. He called out legends. He exposed what really happened behind the curtain. This video reveals the truth behind the 5 men Orndorff couldn't stand and what his harsh words really meant about wrestling's broken system. Before we understand who Orndorff hated, we need to understand where his hatred came from. Paul Orndorff didn't just wake up angry. His rage was forged in fire. It was built in one of the most brutal training environments in wrestling history. The place was called The Dungeon. It was run by promoter Eddie Graham and a group of legitimate submission fighters in Tampa, Florida. The heat was unbearable. The humidity was suffocating, and the workouts were designed to break you. Trainees like Orndorff were forced to do 500 Hindu squats, then 500 push-ups. Then when their bodies were completely exhausted, they had to wrestle 10-minute bouts against submission experts like Hiro Matsuda. These weren't practice matches, they were real fights. Matsuda was a hooker, a wrestler who could legitimately hurt you with holds and submissions. Orndorff didn't have a college wrestling background like some of his peers. He had to rely on pure brute strength just to survive. Every day in that dungeon taught him one thing. Toughness was everything. If you couldn't take the pain, you didn't belong. If you weren't willing to suffer, you were worthless. This brutal standard became Orndorff's entire worldview. Years later, when he saw wrestlers getting pushed because of politics, he felt betrayed. When he saw stars being protected by management, he felt disgusted. His bitterness wasn't random. It came from watching lesser men get rewards he believed they hadn't earned. The dungeon created Mr. Wonderful, but it also created a man who would never forgive weakness. Hulk Hogan was the center of everything Orndorff hated about wrestling. Hogan was the golden boy. He was Vince McMahon's meal ticket. And to Orndorff, that was the problem. Orndorff believed he deserved a WWF championship run. He thought he had earned it. Their 1986 feud drew massive crowds. Wrestling historians say Orndorff gave Hogan some of the best matches of his entire career. The chemistry was undeniable. The heat was real. But Orndorff never got the belt. He was told the company was afraid. They feared he would become real competition for Hogan. They worried his popularity might threaten their golden goose. So they protected Hogan. They kept the title on him no matter what. Orndorff saw this as robbery. He argued that giving him the belt for just 4 or 5 months would have elevated Hogan even more. The fans would have believed anyone could win. The drama would have been real. But corporate politics killed that dream. Management chose the safe path. They picked their favorite and stuck with him. To Orndorff, Hogan wasn't a workhorse. He was a corporate puppet. He was the symbol of everything wrong with wrestling's new system. Orndorff had been trained to believe merit mattered. But in Vince McMahon's world, loyalty and marketing mattered more. Hogan became the face of that broken promise. Every time Orndorff looked at him, he saw his stolen future. The bitterness ran deep. The resentment never faded. Orndorff didn't hate Hogan the person. He hated what Hogan represented, a system that rewarded politics over performance. Andre the Giant was a legend. Everyone knew that. But by the mid-80s, Andre's body was falling apart. He suffered from a condition called acromegaly. It caused constant pain. It made movement difficult, and it made wrestling him a nightmare. Orndorff was forced to work with Andre during this decline. He had to carry the Giant through matches. He had to protect him from injury. He had to make sure Andre didn't get hurt while also trying to have a decent match. For a man trained in the dungeon, this was torture. Orndorff's entire style was built on intensity and precision, but with Andre, he had to throw that out. He couldn't move fast. He couldn't execute complex sequences. He had to constantly adjust his offense just to keep Andre safe. The matches felt slow, they felt restricted, they felt wrong. Orndorff wasn't angry at Andre personally. He was disgusted by the situation. He was resentful of being held back by someone's physical weakness. In Orndorff's world, weakness was unforgivable. If you couldn't perform, you shouldn't be in the ring. But Andre was a legend. He was protected. He was given opportunities despite his limitations. To Orndorff, this was the soft side of wrestling. It was everything opposite to the brutal standards he believed in. Andre represented spectacle over substance. He was a name that sold tickets but couldn't deliver the work, and Orndorff had to pay the price. Every match with Andre reminded him that wrestling had become a business of illusions, not a sport of legitimate toughness. Junkyard Dog had one thing going for him: the fans loved him. JYD could walk to the ring, and the crowd would explode. He had charisma, he had energy, he had a connection with the audience that few could match. But to Paul Orndorff, none of that mattered. Because JYD didn't have discipline. Orndorff worked with Junkyard Dog back in Mid-South Wrestling, a territory known for its brutal, physical style under promoter Bill Watts. Orndorff expected every match to be a war. He expected his opponents to bring intensity every single night, but JYD didn't work that way. He relied on crowd reactions, he coasted on his personality, his matches were inconsistent. Sometimes he was engaged, sometimes he wasn't. For a perfectionist like Orndorff, this was infuriating. JYD was proof that you could succeed in wrestling without putting in the hard work. You could smile your way to the top. You could win matches on charisma alone, but you would never earn respect from the real workers. Orndorff despised wrestlers like this. He saw them as frauds. They took shortcuts. They got by on popularity instead of sweat. To Orndorff, JYD was proof that smiles could win matches, but never respect. The contempt was obvious. Orndorff mocked the casual approach. He hated the idea that wrestling had become entertainment instead of combat. JYD represented everything that made Orndorff bitter about the business. A system that rewarded the wrong things. A world where effort didn't matter as much as likability. Tito Santana was different. He was the only wrestler on this list that Orndorff actually respected. Santana was a good worker. He was disciplined. He was reliable. But Orndorff still didn't like wrestling him. The reason was simple. Their matches were brutal. Santana later described how intense Paul Orndorff was to wrestle. He said their bouts were wars. They were stiff. They were painful. They left both men exhausted and sore. Orndorff even admitted that he enjoyed working with Santana. He ranked some of their matches among the top 5 of his career, but that didn't mean he liked the experience. For Orndorff, wrestling Tito Santana meant paying a physical cost. Every match demanded maximum effort. Every move had to be perfect. Every exchange was real. There was no coasting. There was no protection. Just two men beating the hell out of each other to create something great. This is the irony of Orndorff's list. The man he respected most was also the man who hurt him most. In wrestling terms, calling someone hard to wrestle is the highest compliment. It means they force you to be at your best, but it also means you suffer for it. For Orndorff, whose body was breaking down from years of punishment, that suffering added up. Santana represented the painful truth of what it meant to be great. You couldn't fake it. You couldn't take shortcuts. You had to endure. And sometimes the cost of excellence was simply too high. Vader wasn't on Orndorff's list of wrestlers he didn't like to work with. He was on a different list. The list of men who disrespected him, and Orndorff didn't tolerate disrespect. The story is legendary in wrestling circles. Vader, a massive powerhouse known for being stiff and intimidating, apparently sucker-punched Orndorff. Maybe it was over a disagreement. Maybe it was locker room politics. The reason doesn't matter. What matters is what happened next. Orndorff beat Vader up, and he did it while wearing flip-flops. Think about that. Flip-flops. Not wrestling boots, not sneakers. Flip-flops. Orndorff hit Vader so hard and so many times that he nearly broke his own toe. He left Vader's lips swollen like a watermelon. He made it clear that size didn't matter. Respect did. Orndorff later said he never cared for Vader. He called him a jerk. He said Vader was a bully in the ring and in the locker room. But Orndorff wasn't afraid. He didn't talk about respect. He enforced it. This fight summed up everything about Paul Orndorff's philosophy. You could be bigger, you could be stronger, you could be more famous. But if you crossed the line, Mr. Wonderful would make you pay. The flip-flop story became part of his legend. It proved he lived by the code he preached. No one disrespects Mr. Wonderful. Not in the ring, not in the locker room, not ever. Orndorff's anger came at a cost. His body broke down from years of living the hard way. The brutal matches, the constant physical punishment, the refusal to ever take it easy, all of it added up. By the end of his career, Orndorff's body was destroyed. He suffered severe injuries. He endured constant pain. The same toughness that made him great also made him broken. But even in his bitterness, Orndorff showed he cared. He pushed for a wrestlers' union. He wanted insurance and retirement benefits for performers. He saw too many of his peers crippled from wrestling. He knew the business chewed people up and spit them out. He wanted fairness. He wanted the system to change. His anger wasn't just about himself. It was about wanting wrestling to be more honest, more real, more fair. But that fight isolated him. Orndorff became a man who was respected but feared, admired but avoided. His standards were too high. His temper was too short. His honesty was too brutal. The wrestling business didn't want men like him anymore. They wanted corporate employees. They wanted people who played the game. Orndorff refused, and he paid the price. He became lonely. His relationships suffered. His body failed him. The very thing that made him a legend also made his life harder. The emotional cost of his anger was immense. He was right about so much, but being right didn't make him happy. Paul Orndorff's hate list wasn't really about hate. It was about standards. He despised weakness. He hated politics. He couldn't stand laziness. And he refused to accept anything less than complete commitment. Hulk Hogan represented political favoritism. Andre the Giant represented physical limitations being rewarded. Junkyard Dog represented style over substance. Tito Santana represented the painful cost of excellence. And Vader represented disrespect. Each man on this list showed Orndorff something he couldn't accept about wrestling. His toughness made him great, but it also made him impossible to please. Nothing was ever good enough. No one ever worked hard enough. The business never lived up to the standards of the dungeon. Maybe Paul Orndorff didn't hate people at all. Maybe he just hated what wrestling became. A corporate machine that valued marketing over merit. A business that protected stars instead of rewarding work. A world where toughness didn't matter as much as politics. Orndorff was a relic of an older time. A time when legitimacy was everything. And when that world disappeared, so did his place in it. Like this video if you respect Orndorff's brutal honesty. Subscribe for more wrestling history. And comment your thoughts on Mr. Wonderful's legacy. Did he have a point or was he just bitter? Let us know.